So we're continuing to go over examples of humanism, and this is the continuation of Lorenzo Valla. We mentioned, of course, that he's a priest as well as a humanist, and we talked about one of his works, Elegances of the Latin Language, where he is making an effort to purify medieval Latin and restore Latin to its proper position over the vernacular. Now, even more important than that book, he wrote what's called On the False Donation of Constantine, and that was published the same year as his book that we just went over. Now, let me give you a little bit of background on this, because this donation of Constantine was a Roman decree that stated the emperor, so the Roman emperor, had transferred land to the church, specifically the Pope. And the story goes that the emperor had leprosy and was baptized by the Pope and supposedly cured. So in gratitude, he gave the church land. Okay, the Pope did, the Roman, or the Pope of Rome at that time. So where it says here that the church had claimed it had been granted vast territories by the 4th century Roman Emperor Constantine, that's what I'm talking about, okay? So the actual Roman decree of this transferring of land to the church is known as the donation of Constantine. Well, Valla comes along and starts examining this decree, and he ends up exposing it as an 8th century fraud, and he did it by using textual criticism. So remember, he's looking for original wording of a text. So let me explain what that's about. Ancient scribes made alterations whenever they were copying manuscripts by hand. They may change a word or two to something different, okay? So oftentimes they weren't copying exactly what manuscripts said. They would alter it just a bit. Well, Valla figured out that this document, the donation of Constantine, was a fake through textual criticism. What he did was he found information that did not make sense for that time period. So this was a big deal. Again, he exposed all of this in his work known as On the False Donation of Constantine. Now, something else he was also known for, it says here, he exposed errors in the Latin Vulgate. And if you know anything about the Latin Vulgate, this was the authorized version, the official Bible for the Catholic Church. What he did was he compared it to the Greek texts and pointed out certain words had been changed, which changes the meaning of some passages. So again, this was a huge revelation, okay? So don't forget Valla and his importance to the humanist movement. Our next example of a humanist is Marsilio Ficino, who is the founder of the Platonic Academy. And if you want to make a note on your outline next to Ficino, you can put Platonic Academy, just like I have here, and you can just mention that this is an informal discussion group. Okay, more about that in a minute. So Ficino was one of the most influential humanist philosophers of the 15th century, so during the 1400s. And he is best remembered for founding the Platonic Academy at the request, which is behest, request of Cosimo de' Medici, so one of the de Medicis, Medicis, if you're going to pronounce it in Italian, in 1460s. So we know that this informal discussion group ended up spreading Plato's works throughout much of Europe. Basically what it did was create a rising interest in Plato's works, because all of these intellectuals would come and have these very interesting discussions. The center, of course, was Plato's work. We know Ficino also translated Plato's work into Latin, which gave modern Europeans access to these works for the first time. So that was a big deal. Okay. Now we're going to look at another example of humanism, or a humanist who was a member of this Platonic Academy. I don't want you to get the two men confused. They're both humanists, but here's the difference as far as the Platonic Academy goes. Ficino not only founded this academy, but he led the actual discussions. Okay, this next example, Pico della Mirandola, is simply a member of the Platonic Academy. So he would attend these informal discussions. So Mirandola, like I was telling you, is a member of the Platonic Academy, whereas Ficino actually founded it and led the actual discussions. Mirandola is known for his work titled Oration on the Dignity of Man. This is perhaps the most famous Renaissance work on the nature of mankind. Humankind, mankind, same thing. So in this work, he was emphasizing that humans were created by God and therefore given tremendous potential for greatness, even union with God if they desired it. Humans had free will to be great or to fail. So basically he's saying, be whatever you want and have whatever you choose. You have that free will, and you shouldn't be locked down, by the church to do things exactly the way that they want you to do them. So this is an important humanist of the time period for this particular work. Again, famous work on the nature of mankind. So you don't want to forget that for Mirandola. Now, someone we've already spoken about, but I haven't specifically mentioned him as a humanist, is Machiavelli. He definitely falls in the category of a humanist example, and that's because of his secular ideas in his writings and emphasis on individualism. Those things definitely reflect humanist philosophy. Okay? We know he also studied classical history thoroughly in order to get a more realistic portrait of politics. So again, don't forget about Machiavelli being a good example of a humanist. Next we have Baldassare Castiglione, and he is known for his work, which is considered most important Renaissance work, Book of the Courtier. Because what he did was he focused on social etiquette. Okay, first of all, let me back up and give you what a courtier is, because it's important you understand what that term is. This is someone who works around or in the presence of a prince. So you think about that individual. Okay, you put yourself in that person's shoes. You are working around a ruler, prince in this example, and you are expected to behave and act a certain way. So what Castiglione did was he wrote a book on the social etiquette for such a person who is around or in the presence of a ruler, a prince, for example. And he specified qualities that were necessary to be a true gentleman. And that included physical and intellectual abilities, and of course lead an active life, just like humanists believe, that whole civic humanism. We know he rejected the crude contemporary social habits. People back then, it was very common to just spit on the floor or eat with your hands or wipe your nose with your sleeve. And Castiglione is rejecting all of those behaviors. And he's saying, look, you're going to work around a ruler, then you need to behave a certain way. And these are the guidelines, of social etiquette, how one should behave. He also described the ideal of a Renaissance man, one who is well versed in Greek and Roman classics, someone who can do many things well. They could play music, they could dance. Again, they're well versed in the classics. So that's what a true Renaissance man is. And we know this was a big contrast to the medieval view, whereas they believed you should just be a master in one area instead of be good in many things, which is what a Renaissance man encompasses. So we have two more examples of humanists to go over before we move on to the Italian Renaissance art. So that's something to look forward to, especially if you're one who like the arts. Our next example of a humanist is Francesco Guicciardini, and he was a great historian who wrote more accurate chronicles of Italian and Florentine history to teach lessons. So the first examples of analysis of history would be the history of Italy and history of Florence. So both of these are the works of Guicciardini, and they happen to be the first examples of analysis of history. So again, a lot of new things happening thanks to these humanist writers. Finally, we have Johann Gutenberg. Some of you may have heard of him because he is best remembered for the invention of the printing press, which is going to completely change how things are getting spread throughout Europe. So this is considered one of the most important inventions in human history. That's how important this is, not just of the time period, but all of human history. It is up there. We know the printing press is basically movable type that was developed by Gutenberg, and this is making possible the spread of humanistic literature at an astonishing speed. So you think about what they are no longer going to have to do. It says no longer would copies of works need to be done individually by hand, all the long hours spent by people handwriting, copies of documents. That will be diminished thanks to this new invention of the printing press. We can see here in 1457 and 58, the first printed Bible was published in the city of Mainz, Germany, thanks to the printing press. And of course, since it is the first printed Bible, not by hand, but an actual invention, it will be named after Gutenberg. So this is, you can see a picture of the famous Gutenberg Bible, the first true book in the West produced from movable type. This is just one copy of it that you can find in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. If you ever have gone there, I hope that you saw this because it is an impressive work. We also know that thanks to the printing press, we are going to see the facilitation of the phenomenal spread of the Reformation, which are these new religious ideas of the time. So thanks to the printing press, we will see the ideas of the Reformation spread very quickly, okay? As well as, of course, now we're going to see multiple copies of these humanists' works, okay? So I hope I have given you a good indication of how important this particular invention is and how important all the humanists are to this Renaissance period. So we are now done with Roman numeral 3, and the next video that you will see will deal with section 4, Roman numeral 4, the Italian Renaissance art. So we're going to go over some of the famous artists, their technique, and so more to come, so stand by for that.